The holiday season is here, and if you have a saddle hunter in your life, now is the perfect time to visit tetherednation.com. Hell, you might be the saddle hunter and just looking to buy yourself a personal gift this year. Head over to tetherednation.com. They have all your saddle needs covered, whether you're looking for update your platform, whether you're looking for lineman's belts, tethers. If you're looking for some new super lightweight sticks, they have their Tethered One climbing stick, which is a killer stick, the lightest in the industry and super ridiculous strong. Or maybe you're looking to upgrade your saddle or get into a new saddle. They've got a bunch of different saddles to choose from last year's Mantis to the Phantom to the Menace. They have all your saddle needs covered. So be sure to head over to tetherednation.com and find some saddle gear under your tree this year. Temps are dropping and Old Man Winter is just around the corner. Now is the perfect time to take advantage of the Skull Brew Coffee Company discount for this holiday season. Head over to skullbrewcoffee.com, use the promo code CYBER20 to get your savings. They've got 3 killer coffee roasts, a light roast, medium roast, and a dark roast. They also recently launched a new product, their Backcountry single-serve packs, for those of us who are looking for a killer coffee on the go. Be sure to check out their swag as well. They recently got some new t-shirts in and some thermal hoodies. So head over to skullbrewcoffee.com, use the promo code CYBER20 at checkout, and save yourself some cash on some killer coffee. Looking to up your trail camera game this year? Then look no further than our buddies over at Exodus. Our buddies at Exodus are giving a 25% off discount across their entire website while inventory lasts. The one thing that will not be included, unfortunately, is the Exodus Render cell camera. However, they will be extending this same 25% off offer when they have more inventory in stock in the not-so-distant future. So to lock in your savings, head over to ExodusOutdoorGear.com and use the code BF25 at checkout and save yourself some cash. Welcome to the Truths from a Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 206. Today I'm joined by Bill Thompson of Spartan Forge, and we're talking machine learning and predicting deer movement. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. Hope you had a killer Thanksgiving. I hope you had plenty of turkey, plenty of stuffing, mashed potatoes, or whatever it is that you like. Here at my house, we do the typical traditional turkey. I almost called it sturfy. Been a long morning so far. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, all that kind of stuff. We did a small holiday this year at the Campbell household. It was just me, my wife, my daughter. We weren't able to travel home. I think I mentioned this in the last podcast. It was like the entire in-laws section of the family had come down with the Rona. So they weren't accepting visitors for obvious reasons. So we just kind of hung out here at the house, which wasn't terrible. I was able to get a couple extra days of hunting in, which was good. Maybe it was good. I'm not sure. I didn't kill anything, so whether it was good or not, I guess, is debatable. But I got to spend some time in a tree, which is never a terrible thing. Of course, gun season came in here this past Saturday in Pennsylvania. So I hope all of you that were toting some firearms out there had some luck. I actually ended up taking, this. I think this is the second year that it's come in on a Saturday. It historically had always come in on Monday. In the past 2 years, they've done Saturday, and actually you were able to hunt Sunday this past week as one of the 3 Sundays that the Game Commission had gotten approved to extend to those of us Keystone hunters. So I'm sure a lot of folks took advantage of that. I'm digging the Sunday hunting. Unfortunately, I don't think I've capitalized on any of the Sunday hunting. When we had the archery Sunday hunting, I was still just getting back from my out-of-state trip. There was a Sunday hunt during bear season, if I'm not mistaken, and I wasn't bear hunting, so that didn't really apply to me. And then this past weekend, typically whenever gun or rifle season hits, I actually usually take that time and do take a little break, essentially, because I've been going hard since mid-September. And I don't gun hunt, and it's not that I have anything against it or anything like that. I just prefer to hunt with a bow. And I will hunt during gun season with a bow. but it's usually not the opening weekend. That weekend is typically, a reserve for the wife and the kiddo. We typically get our Christmas tree and do all that kind of family stuff. So it's a little bit of a reset for me to give them some time back, since I've been gone for a while and been busy for the past few months. So that's essentially what I've had going on here. Nothing crazy in terms of updates for deer hunting. I think I might make one more trip. It'd actually be in Pennsylvania to a completely new area. Gonna be honest, I had some decent bucks on camera, and it was during the time frame that I was gone on my trip, which is kind of a bummer. And not sure what the outlook is looking like for late season. I don't have really any great spots for late season that I have significant food sources or anything like that. Most of the places that I'm hunting to are pretty pressured, especially during gun season. So I don't know. A couple of these pieces are brand new to me this year, so I'm not sure what it's going to look like when gun season hits or after gun season hits. So I'll just kind of have to take a wait and see approach on that. So what I might end up doing is taking a little bit of a trip to a different area of Pennsylvania that I've been looking at, that I wanted to check out, that has some bigger wood settings, just more room to roam, and go just do some freelance hunting in those places and see if I can't figure something out for late season at those places. And if nothing else, start gathering some intel for next year. So I'm not exactly throwing in the towel for this year, so to speak. But I might be taking a little bit of a different approach than I've taken in years past. So we'll have to just kind of keep the update, or I'll keep you guys updated on that. And that, the outcome obviously remains to be seen there. So, but with that, I'm going to go ahead and just jump into today's podcast. Have a cool show for you guys today. With Bill Thompson. Been a while trying to get Bill on for what seems like months. Bill is the gentleman who owns Spartan Forge. If you've not heard of Spartan Forge, you need to be sure to be checking that out. He's actually running a promo for the listeners of this show. If you head over to Spartan Forge, I think .ai is what the website is. He mentions it at the end of this at the end of the podcast, and you use the promotional code Truth, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. You will get a discount on signing up for the Spartan Forge app and the information that it contains. There's also a 14-day trial, free trial period too, that you can sign up to check out. But what Spartan Forge is really, Bill, when we talk about his history, or his, what he does for a living and so forth. But in a nutshell, he works in intelligence gathering in the military, essentially, put in layman's terms, he goes out and finds bad guys, for teams to go out and extract, so, for example, he spent some time in the Middle East, of course, putting packages together to provide intel to a SEAL team or Ranger team or whomever it is that's going in to extract a bad guy, and puts together all that information. And a lot of this is done through a bunch of different, data sources and stuff like that. And so Bill kind of was thinking like, hey, if I can do this and there's technology out here and there's the capability of finding, bad guys using this type of approach, I'm sure I could probably apply this to deer hunting as well. And so that's what Spartan Forge really does. It's a predictive platform that, using a large data set and starting to discern and find patterns within those data sets to understand how deer are going to move within different regions relative to, some of the maybe more concrete variables that we have, like, wind, weather, or, wind, temp, those types of things, and start to give you better odds to understand, the higher movement days. And we go through and we kind of classify what higher movement is, lower movement, or abnormal movement versus high movement, whatever the case is. We define some of those definitions in this that he uses in his app. So without further ado, Bill does a much better job of explaining what this is and how it works than I will. So we're just going to go ahead and cut to the chase and get to the discussion between Bill and I. But before I do that, I just want to say, as always, thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And if you've listened to this show for any length of time, well, I mean, if you listen to this show, you'll know that I'm a deer nerd. And if you're listening to this show, I suspect that you are too. But what you might not know, if you listen to some of the way earlier podcasts, I'm a little bit of a deer nerd / data technology geek. I like bells, I like whistles, I like gadgets. Anything that can kind of help me get smarter in the deer woods, I dig. And so today's guest can help us do just that. I'm talking to Mr. Bill Thompson of Spartan Forge. What's going on, Bill? How are you?
Hey, how are you? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you officially too, man. I know we've been trading. It feels like we've been trading messages on Instagram for like an eternity.
It's been a while. Yeah. I think we started this summer, right?
I think so. Yeah, man. It was, it's always the funny thing with podcasting is you would think doing a weekly show, like you would have all the time in the world to get all the people on that you want to get on all the time. But it's, as you kind of get into like your content calendar and stuff like that, it's like you have things kind of planned out. And when you and I were going back and forth, I was literally in the midst of doing like what felt like a 40-part series with Dan Enfault, where we had so many episodes. And so to try to get anyone else in the middle of those was challenging. And then of course, once that wrapped up, we had hunting season hit, right? And everyone's crazy and in the timber as much as they can possibly get out. And so now, even though we're still in the midst of hunting season, now is kind of the time where it feels like you can kind of get back on a regular schedule and start to get folks on. And now I kind of look and say, all right, now who haven't I been able to get on that I need to get on the show? And so I'm glad you reached out to me, man, because you've been a guy I've been wanting to get on.
Great. Well, I appreciate you having me on. Excited to do this tonight.
Yeah, man. It's well, first before we get started, man, we'll jump into all the nuts and bolts of all the technology and all the goodies, which I'm excited to get to. But before we do that, if you wouldn't mind, just give the folks at home that are listening a little bit of background about you, where you're from, what you do for a living.
Yeah, so I grew up in North Dakota, born and raised. Joined the military when I was 17. I'm actually retiring this year. I retire, I think my last day in the Army is the 1st of July. So it'll be almost 21 years. And yeah, so I get out of the military and I've been a bow hunter since, or I don't know, 10 or 12 years. What year? Yeah, 12 years, I suppose. I've been bow hunting. I used to do like leisure hunting as a child, like go with, uncles or with friends of the family and just, rifle hunting. But it never really, I guess it didn't grab me. Like I thought it, like if I had knowing the whole story now, I thought it would, maybe it should have, but it didn't. And then I joined the military and it was actually a good friend of mine who got me into bow hunting. And so, yeah, I've been in the military. Like I said, I'm retiring 21 years. And as I get out here, this business venture that we're talking about today is kind of what I've been focusing on. In the military, I did it's like, I guess, a hodgepodge of things. I'm a chief warrant officer in the Army, which is for anybody who served, they'd kind of know that we're the technicians. You can kind of think about it as the people who are responsible for making sure that the unit's got the most, try to be the most state of art equipment, that, there's a user expert, that it's understood. And then that capability gaps or programmatic gaps for future technology, they're identified and then they're being met. That's kind of the role of the warrant officer in the organization. They're usually guys who start out as like enlisted folks. Like myself, I went up to a staff sergeant and I became a warrant officer. And yeah, now I'm at W4. And like I said, retiring, excited to do that. Can't wait. I think I did the official count yesterday, but it's something like 6 or 7 years of overseas time and
Wow.
6 deployments. 6 combat deployments. So I'm ready for the next stage of my life.
Right.
Hopefully I'll be, doing this exclusively, but yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Nice, man. Well, first and foremost, man, thank you for your service. I appreciate what you've given and what you've sacrificed. My family is all, ashamedly, maybe sometimes, I'm the only male in my family with my last name to not go to the military. So that was kind of a big deal. My dad had Marine recruiters and stuff at our house on Saturdays whenever I was a junior and senior, and my wrestling coach was a Marine as well. And so going to school, they were intending for me to go to, I think it was the Virginia Military Institute.
That's great. Yeah.
Because they had a wrestling program there.
Okay.
But I ended up going to a different state school in Pennsylvania and didn't even wrestle at all. Just kind of like walked away.
Oh no.
Yeah, just kind of walked away from all of it. I was a musician, so that was like, it was those two things were kind of at odds. That, and it was of the age where I was like, I was going to do pretty much the opposite of anything that anyone asked me to do or tell me to do at that point. But much like you, man, it's like I started hunting early too, and I can kind of understand what you're talking about in terms of like, I grew up gun hunting. It was very much a rite of passage where I grew up in Pennsylvania. PA is a big like heritage hunting sport. And it's interesting. You and I are doing this now because we're on like almost the eve as you and I are recording this of gun season, getting ready to kick off this coming Saturday after the holiday, after the Thanksgiving weekend. And that was just like, I remember having butterflies in my stomach like 3 days leading up to it, just like jonesing for it, you know. But as I got older, there was just something about it. You know, I always liked hunting and being in the outdoors and stuff like that, but it wasn't until I picked up a bow that all of a sudden, like, my hunting life changed at that moment. You know, so I can totally understand. But like, what for you was it whenever you picked up a bow, like knowing that you hunted previously and then all of a sudden you picked up a bow and it just became different? Like, what was it for you that was so that basically created the obsession?
Yeah, it's kind of like a storm of like a mixture of things. I guess it kind of sounds cliche, but it is the truth, and I try to stick to the truth as much as possible. I got this kind of feeling, you know, I hate to be one of those guys who always talks about the military when he's in the military. I actually don't like that about myself, because it gets kind of annoying. I understand that. So this will be a 30-second story. So anybody who wants to skip forward can skip forward. But basically, there's a sense of what's the word? I feel fulfilled right when I deploy, and I know that the work that I've done led to a kinetic operation that puts bad guys in the ground. Like, I guess I'm a very results oriented person. So I don't like working in like an ether. I don't like abstract work. I like, you know, maybe it's why I liked getting into engines when I was younger. It's like a problem with the engine, figure out the engine, fix the engine, and then you're done. And you feel you've completed the task, and that's it. I don't like, you know, rolling the snowball in an organization and not knowing if my effort's really leading to anything. So in the military, it was like, okay, we're going after it. You know, at that time, you know, the cliche is Abu bad guy. You know, he's number 10 on our list. When we get Abu bad guy, it's a good day. So as an intelligence officer, my job was to put that puzzle together for the kinetic strike team or whoever the guys who were going in to actually do the operation. And a lot of times, especially early on, I was going with them on these operations. So putting that all together, and then the intelligence package, and making sure that we were operating in a safe manner and doing all of those things, and then actually going out, getting the guy, rolling him up, whether that means, you know, he's in the ground or he's in a cell. It was that the feeling that I got from that was unmatched. And actually, very early in my career, I would worry, like, am I going to ever be able to do anything else this fulfilling? So for me, once I started bow hunting, and I got that first, you know, buck fever with the adrenaline. It's a very similar situation to that I'd feel like when I was on an objective, and I'm about to be, you know, sitting in a car watching some guys knock a door down, and then going in and doing an operation, and me supporting that in the field. That it was a very similar, you know, all of this preparation, all of this work leading up to this moment of truth, and then executing and completing the mission. I get that with whitetail hunting, and I especially get it now because my focus for about the past 8 years has been exclusively public land. So understanding the battlefield, isolating the variables, putting the plan together, making the puzzle pieces fit, and then, you know, watching that buck walk over a draw that, you know, out of the 10,000 acres that he could be running through, you've narrowed it down to like this one piece. And then I get that same sense of meaning, that same sense of duty, that same flame in my chest that I get during a military operation. And for me, it's been like it's helped me really with transition. I think I would be much more afraid of the post-military life if I wasn't doing this job right now. Because it's allowed me to have this same still sense of meaning. So for anybody who wants to know, like, or if anybody, you know, has ever thought to themselves, I wonder what it would be like in combat. I can't speak as a door kicker, but I can speak as somebody who supports door kickers. And I've done it from, you know, every level from tier 1 units, developmental group, or SEAL Team 6, all the way to, you know, a green infantry team. I've supported all of them. So, you know, being a part of that, for anyone who wants to know what that's like, it's like, go learn public land and then put yourself on a 145-inch deer or 150-inch deer, where 95% of that hunting population is saying those deer don't exist on that land. Like that for me. Sorry, that's a really long answer, and that was more than 30 seconds, but that's the truth. That's, you know, that's what it is. That's what it's about for me, and that's why I'm blessed to continue be doing this as I transition out of the military.
Yeah, no, Obviously different for me, but it was still replacing that sense. I was a musician previously, and it was the one thing whenever I left music, we moved back from Orlando, and I was snowboarding because I grew up snowboarding too, but snowboarding and skateboarding was just something that didn't do it for me anymore. And then a buddy of my father-in-law put a bow in my hand and put me in a stand one day, and that was it. That was the switch. It was all over from that point forward. And the reason being was just it was the only moment that I could get that replicated being in front of 5,000 people playing a guitar. You know what I mean? It was kind of similar, right? You're replicating a moment and a feeling and a sense of accomplishment. Very much the same for what I was kind of looking for. But you're right, man. It's like, especially with your background, it's like whenever you're kind of detailing out and kind of picking apart like a piece of public land or whatever, it's like your background is well suited for that, because you literally in your career are looking for a needle in a haystack in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
In public land, there are big deer on public land in every state, I believe. And Pennsylvania is one of those states where folks will say where there aren't good deer. I've got some trail camera data that would tell you otherwise. You know what I mean? That I have found some good ones, but they are hard to find. And so it's that diligence, it's working a plan, doing your research, understanding, like you say, the variables that you're up against, whether it's pressure, whether it's going to have the right type of habitat and resources that those deer are going to need at these different times of the season, and how those are going to rotate. And, you just kind of have to stack all those things up. And the hard part is distilling all that information, right? And trying to get to like, this is when it's going to happen, or this is the window it's going to happen. And what I think is interesting is you've taken all of that kind of knowledge and kind of have applied it to what you've been working on as you're getting ready to go into your post-military career, which I think is going to be super helpful. But before we jump right into that, I know you're using this approach for your season. Tell me how's your season been?
Good. Season's been going well so far. Frustrated as of a little bit lately. I got an early season buck in October, a 10-pointer in North Dakota that I was super happy about on public land. And then I came here. I've taken 2 doe since I've been. So I live in West Virginia right now.
Okay.
In fact, I think we're probably close to each other. I was thinking about it the other day. You're in the Pittsburgh area?
No, I actually live just north of Philadelphia, but my home place is Bedford, Pennsylvania, which isn't far from West Virginia. I used to wrestle in I'd wrestle in, what tournament was that? It was it was actually the national I think it was the national finals for the AAUs, I think, was in Morgantown. So I'd wrestle there.
Yeah. So that's exactly where I am.
Yeah. I'd wrestle
in Bridgeport, which is right by here.
Okay.
Right
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for now, I forget my train of thought there. What was I getting to before I said that?
You killed a good buck in in the Dakotas,
yeah,
2 does in West Virginia.
Yeah. So I've taken 2 does here, both on a stock, which is a lot of fun. And then I had a very good buck encounter. I don't even like talking about it. This was maybe on the 13th or something like that, or maybe the 14th. And so I had a buck, or I should say, I'll tell the whole story and give it context. I'm sitting in a spot, I have my bow up on like a hanger. I like to stand in the trees. I still use like a lone wolf, climber, or I'm sorry, sticks and a lone wolf stand. I like to stand. I don't even bring a seat into the woods with me. I like to stand the whole time. I don't like to get too comfortable or get too like into my phone or anything like that. I focus on what's going on around me. And standing the whole time helps me do that, right? So I'm standing, my bow's hanging up, and a doe comes in and just starts eating, like just kind of meandering. And you wouldn't know that I've been bow hunting, for 10 years, peak rut at this time here. And I don't go to grab my bow just in case. I just continue watching this doe. Then all of a sudden she starts looking at me and kind of can pick me out. I think she's looking right at me, but I'm not moving. So she just kind of goes back to eating. We just call it tolerates my presence. Then all of a sudden I start hearing the grunting coming from the trees, and just in literally 2 seconds, this buck pops out. Really nice buck. Probably if he had 1 inch of antlers, he had 140-inch antlers and a drop tine on his right side.
Oh, jeez.
And he comes out and just starts barking at this, just going at this doe, and she just kind of spins around. So I go to grab my bow, and as soon as I move my arm, she looks up at me. As soon as I move my arm, she looks at me. She sees me moving my arm to go for the bow, and she takes off. The buck never sees me and just follows her.
Right.
So I didn't get a shot at him.
Oh man.
And then 3 days ago, I saw probably the largest 6-pointer I've ever seen in my life. And I went on a stalk after him. I was just kind of scouting because I'd gotten into a new area that I'd never seen before, and I wanted to kind of understand how the deer move. So I went on kind of an observational sit. I got up really high. I wasn't expecting to kill anything. It was just a bunch of ridge systems and cuts that were interacting, and I wanted to see if the deer were down in this valley below, which was very thick, or if they were coming from the ridges up top. So I was trying to look at everything. And I saw this massive 6-pointer. He was at least 130 inches. He was a Pope and Young 6-pointer.
That's a big deer.
A 3x3. And I was like, oh man, I got to get after that deer. And once again, it was like, I was telling my buddy about this on the phone the other night, but it reminded me of Jurassic Park. You know, when the Australian goes out after the raptors.
Yeah.
And the raptor is on the side, and he says, clever girl, and then they maul him.
Yeah.
Same thing for me without the mauling. I get within about 50 yards of this 6-point buck, and like the only place for him to go is towards me. And I'm like, here it comes. Here it is. I'm about to put a cap on the season. And he starts to just move the other direction, back up from where he came. So I just took out my grunt tube and gave a couple of grunts. As soon as I did that, I looked to my right and saw like 3 does in a bush.
Oh man.
And the does start blowing like I had just like shot one of their fawns.
Right.
I mean, blowing like I've never heard. Maybe it was because they were so close. They were maybe like 11 yards or 12 yards away from me, but I could not see them. It was like a dead bush where the leaves were still on it. So that was like brown on brown, and I couldn't see them. And they started blowing at me like I had just killed their fawn or something. Like it was insane. And the buck saw it and just took off.
Right.
So those have been my 2 experiences so far. Still plenty of season left.
Yep.
I've actually killed the biggest bucks. All of my very large deer, besides one, were killed during the secondary rut.
Okay.
I've always had an affinity for the secondary rut. I don't know why. It could be a coincidence thing. But all of my biggest deer have been killed during the secondary rut, and that's coming up here for us. The peak of it is the 5th of December.
Okay.
So that week before then, I plan on, getting out there and doing my diligence. So that's my season so far.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that, not grabbing your bow. It's almost like we're living a similar life, because I had that exact, I won't say exact, but a very analogous situation to what you had. I was literally in a tree. It's a spot I've been kind of I think I hunted it twice. It's kayak in access. There's 3 good deer in this area hitting this one primary scrape that I kind of found in the off season. I kind of prioritized it, and I knew if I just waited and bided my time and let it turn on, I could kill a good deer there. Well, the bummer of it was I was leaving for Missouri on like the 31st, so I couldn't take off work on the 30th or 31st. And the biggest deer that I had on that scrape was hitting it the 30th and the 31st at like 8 o'clock in the morning. Like perfect timing, right? But I couldn't get out to it. And so I was like, you know what? I'll just wait till I get back from Missouri. And I went to a second state. I was out for 2 weeks. And I was like, when I get back, I'll try to find some good weather days and I'll hit it. So I went this past weekend when I was off. Perfect wind. It was like a northwest wind, kind of giving him the wind, kind of, but it was a very risky wind, put it that way, right? And sitting there, 7 o'clock, like daybreak, like shooting light, and I hear some rustling going on. I convinced myself that it was a squirrel, but I looked and I saw a deer kind of moving through this bush, similar to what you had with those does. But I couldn't see exactly what it was. But I had a cell camera in this general area, and there was a doe that was hitting this scrape often. And then there was also like a fork horn that I had an encounter with that had hit that scrape pretty often too. Like those 2 were like very frequent visitors to that area, right? And so I just had made the assumption, right? What assumptions do? It makes an ass out of you and me, right? So right, I made the assumption that it was going to be one of those 2 deer. And I didn't pick up my bow. And then I saw a little flash of antler, and I assumed it was that Forky, and I still didn't pick up my bow. And by the time his head popped through, it was one of the 3 shooters that I had on there. And it was in a saddle. And so he came out on my weak side, and that was the only spot where I was bare, where I didn't have cover. So once he broke the brush, I was in trouble. And so I grabbed my bow and didn't move, and I expected him to make his way to the scrape that was in front of me. And if he did that, I was golden, but he ended up staying behind me. And that's exactly where I didn't have any wind. So my milkweed was just dropping straight to the ground. He got behind me. I had him at 14 yards. I could have shot him, but I just couldn't get turned. And then he ended up getting behind me and ended up just bugging out. And he was at 5 yards when he finally recognized something was up. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I was like, because I hit one in Missouri that didn't recover. Right. So that was a bummer. And then I screwed the pooch on this one. I don't know. I was like, man, I just keep making like all kinds of rookie mistakes this year and it's driving me crazy. I was like, I don't know don't know what the deal is, but
it's just one of those things where I don't know what it is. Cause it seems to me like I have to learn some of these lessons 1 or 2 times and I don't know why.
yeah.
Like everywhere else in my life, I'm very diligent, but it seems to, when it comes to hunting, there's like things I got to learn a couple of times and then I'll never stop doing them. But man, it really stinks when, your whole, the whole season can hinge on, 10 seconds of time.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think part of for me is when I see a deer, I try to stay as calm as possible. Like, and so if I convince myself when I see something that it's not a for sure bet, right? That it's like, oh, it's just a doe or whatever. Like I'm able to kind of manage my breathing and my buck fever, if you will. So I kind of do that consciously to try to keep myself from getting freaked out. So I try not to make any rash, quick decisions. I try to do everything kind of methodically. But what ends up happening in that case is that it didn't take an active movement to get my bow immediately and then calm myself. So because usually grabbing the bow for me like initiates that a fight or flight response almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it's about shit's about to get real. You know what I mean? It's about to go down if I have my bow in my hand. So then it becomes a little harder for me to maintain. And so I try to stay as chill as I possibly can for as long as I can. That way, by the time it has to happen, I'm already in like kill mode and I'm not even thinking. Like it's just happening,
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is that I wait too long and that I screw myself, which is what happens. So, but man, let's jump now into what you have going on post military. So Spartan Forge, I want to know, like, understand your background. So I get how you got to this product, to this idea based on what you do in your career currently. But aside from that, like, where did this idea come from? Like, how did you come up with like hey, I should put this thing together that kind of aggregates all this data that can help me make or help others make better decisions when it comes to getting in the timber or hunting and trying to kill mature deer?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, the short answer is I stole it from MIT. So I was working with, there's a organization called Lincoln Labs, which is an offshoot of MIT, and they're kind of the government arm, I guess is the best way to put it. But the charge of that organization, and then there was another one that I was kind of AdCon or part-time to called DARPA. So these two organizations charge is to kind of, come up with, push technology to its limit. And I can give you like a quick little, a summary, like a program manager in one of those organizations, especially DARPA, might say something like, I want to create a space shuttle, and this is just an example, a hypothetical, but it's not something I don't believe they've done, but I want to create a space shuttle that, can go X and X speed, right? It can go this fast.
Right.
So the goal of the organization, as I understood it while I was there, was not actually to create that space shuttle. That was the specified outcome. But what has to happen is there are all kinds of problems that have to be overcome in order to make that space shuttle do what they wanted it to do. And so that what the organization wants to do is take all of those spin-offs. Say they had to invent a new type of Teflon to make rear entry possible or exiting the Earth's atmosphere possible. And the Teflon that we had now didn't work. And then it also required a processor or something like that we didn't have. So those two things would be invented and get put on this chassis, this piece of technology. And then even if they don't make it to the finish line on the product, they've still got, 2 or 3 things that had to be invented by these other organizations in order to make it happen. So about 12 years ago, I was on a project that was doing a very similar thing to what I'm doing with Spartan Forge right now, is for terrorists. So it was aggregating. It was basically taking big data and other things, classified stuff. It's not really important anyway, even if I could talk about it. That it would aggregate all of this data, and then and machine learning and artificial intelligence really in in its most nascent form, or its purest form, I think, is really just high-level pattern recognition. It's the ability to take, more data than any human could ever spend in any amount of time in their life, doing analysis on, and then conducting analysis and finding meaningful patterns that answer the questions that the programmer is trying to answer on behalf of the user or the consumer. So we did this, and it was actually a successful program. And once again, like I kind of talked before, it led to us putting some bad guys in the ground and identifying patterns and movements about behavior, how they might be doing resupply runs, where they might be camping in the mountains in a particular year, how they might be doing their logistics, and getting all of that from social media, putting it all together, and then saying, okay, we've figured something out that's going to allow our guys to go out and be safer when they're on an operation. So I was in Afghanistan, I believe, the first time I really started thinking about this. I was part of a SIGINT team, I guess at the time, a signals intelligence team, on the side of a mountain, and we were gathering information for this program that I'm talking about right now. And it occurred to me, I just started whitetail hunting probably a couple of years earlier than this. I think this was probably before 2010, we'll put it that way. And I thought to myself, this is something that could be done for white-tailed deer and elk. And it just, I need to be able to bring it. I just need to figure out what my repositories of information is. Because like with any machine learning company or any artificial intelligence company, the value is not really in the algorithms. The algorithms have been around in some cases in like 30 or 35 years. For 30 or 35 years. The value is really the data,
right,
and the ability to go out and grab all of that data. And for me, that was the longest pole in the tent. It took me about 6 or 7 years of cold calling academics, biologists, and state wildlife organizations before I actually had enough data to create a neural network that did prediction in any meaningful sense. And for me and the two guys that I work with, meaningful to us meant like about 60% of the time it needed to be accurate.
Right.
And when we first started, we all decided that if we couldn't get above 60%, and deer truly were just these like super individualistic types of animals that don't have, patterns that are exploitable by either humans or the technology that we have right now as humans, then we weren't going to do it. But after the first like 3 or 4 years of collecting data and doing it, and then throwing the algorithms at it, we were getting into like the 50s. And then we knew that if we just got more and more disparate data from other pieces of the U.S., once we started getting up towards 60, then we knew we had something. And, now we're north of 60%.
Wow.
And we're verging, I think, to the top. I think we're close to the top. I've been dealing with some pretty notable wildlife academics who have been using our information for studies, and other researchers, and they think we're getting near the top on prediction, at least prediction as it relates to movement. We've started a venture on pattern analysis as well, which is something I can get into later.
Mm-hmm.
And that is kind of in its nascent form. But so that's kind of how I get from there to here, is basically assisting the military in building these things to perform and conduct in what we call intelligence preparation of the battlefield, and then translating that for the hunter, right? Because when you think about it, it's all very similar, right? There's a specified target. There's information being out there in droves, whether it's social media analysis, it's insurance, car collision data analysis, it's white-tailed collar GPS data analysis. All these repositories of information out there are present, and they can enable us to do pattern analysis. It's just the work becomes going out there and getting the data,
right,
and being able to commit that kind of time. So for me, it was like 15 hours a week for many years.
Right.
I would just commit my time to trying to go out and getting this data, because I had the vision that this thing could work, because I had seen it work in what I thought were very much more austere manners, or austere circumstances as it related to what we were doing with terrorists. So I thought, if we can do this with terrorists, and terrorists are, giving this much information to us, there's no way that I shouldn't be able to do this with a white-tailed deer when they're wearing a GPS collar.
Right.
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 Like that's all there.
Right.
It's all there.
Right. Exactly.
So,
it's interesting that when you talk about data, because I think when people think about just in as a frame of reference, when they think of like Google or Netflix or whatever, they'll think Google's value is in their user base, right? That so many people use it. It's like, no, Google's value is in the fact that they have more data than anyone in the planet could possibly have about any one person or any group of people, right?
Yeah.
And that is really where their value is. And that's how you get all the predictive stuff. Like when they serve you things in your feed, it's not by accident. Same thing with Netflix. Right. When they serve you the next best thing for you to watch, it's not by accident. It's because they've been following you and they understand what your behaviors are, what your patterns are, probably down to time of day when you're online, what your interests are at different times of day. I would imagine they could probably even segment it, that way as well. So with that, obviously you're collecting droves and droves of data to try to make these predictions about whitetails and how they're going to behave and what they're going to potentially do. You mentioned collared deer data. Talk to me a little bit about what kind of data you're getting from collared deer, and then what other resources are you looking at for your data inputs? Are you also using any inputs from like biology observation and just some of like, I guess more of like, your rudimentary physical sciences, if you will, outside of the collared and more digital data gathering?
Yeah. So there's a couple pieces there. I guess first you said you wanted to know about the GPS collars, that data. So that's just basically working with academics. Academics have their own purposes for studies. They want to see fawn recruitment. They want to see site selection. They want to see response to predators. These types of things that state wildlife organizations are sponsoring and the federal government sponsoring to understand the population, because, there's big money for government, right, in selling licenses to kill deer.
Right.
So they sponsor these studies. They collar these animals, send them out into the field for, a year to 6. I think 6 or 8 years is the longest study I've got a hold of. And, the GPS collars are, they have a time hack on them. So they have like a temporal boundary of like every 15 minutes, it takes a snapshot of where that deer is on the earth, or sometimes it's a half hour. I've seen some studies where it's like once every 6 or 12 hours. So all of these, GPS fixes, basically we go out there and get them, and then we do analysis. And they're in the intelligence community, there's this saying where, and there's just classic case studies on this. Like, for instance, when we went into Iraq for weapons of mass destruction, we only had one source of information. And I can't remember the guy's name at this time, but it was basically one human intelligence reporter, right? And the human intelligence reporter said, yes, there's, Saddam has these chemicals, these weapons of mass destruction, and it's here. And, we started a whole war based on that guy's recommendation. And kind of the post-mortem on that was, we cannot launch kinetic operations based off of one piece of intelligence, right?
Right.
We need, you can Google it. This is all open source, but, the United States government, the military has human intelligence, signals intelligence. We now have cyber, right? That falls into a couple of categories. There's GeoInt, there's OSINT, which is open source intelligence, right? So before we're going to put, servicemen or women in harm's way, or before we're going to spend blood and treasure on a military operation, we need to be dang sure that as many pieces of the intelligence puzzle suggest that the person that we're pursuing is the right person and we're doing it for the right reasons, right?
Yep.
So that, you could think of that as data modality. And it's the same thing with Spartan Forge. So we get this GPS collar data, and then we line that up with other pieces of data that we're finding out there. So whether that's scraping social media or that's contacting insurance organizations, there's meaningful information that we draw from there as well. For instance, if in September I get a bunch of data from let's just say Alabama DNR,
right,
and we look at that, and then we say, okay, when is the overlap on when does and bucks, right, are singled up and pushed off to somewhere? Like, when does that happen most? Suggesting that there's rutting activity, or that a doe is willing to stand and mate for a buck, right?
Right.
When does that occur? So we get some dates based off of that. And then maybe I go to State Farm, or I go to State Farm, or I go to USAA, two insurance organizations that were able to pass me data. And then they tell me when their peak car collisions are, right? So this is when in that section of Alabama, the most cars are hitting deer. Okay, so that's a second data point. And then I'll go to a state wildlife organization that has done fawn measuring on from harvested does or from car collision does,
Mm-hmm.
and then they look at peak conception dates, right? And then I go to social media and I go to, whatever place, Alabama, social media, deer hunting, bow hunting group.
Mm-hmm.
And then I look at when the most pictures were posted of guys killing big deer or gals killing big deer. Right now I've got 4 sources of information.
Yep.
So then I look at that temporally and I say, when have the stars aligned to that? When is all of my data suggesting? The first question you might ask yourself is, when are deer moving the most, or when are they on the hoof,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then I line that up with peak conception dates. Then I look at that. Then I do that data modality work that we talked about before. And I say, based on when hunters are posting pictures of, killing big bucks online, when insurance organizations are sending emails to their consumers saying, hey, look out in the 3rd week of October because there's tons of deer movement, right? And then I have the fawn measuring, and I have the GPS collars. All of that lines up. Now I've got a date, right? Now I've got, or a time series that I can say, under these conditions, these temperatures, this cloud cover, this barometric pressure, this many storms happening before this peak of this rut in this area, or I should say of this peak breeding in this area, here's when deer seem to be moving the most.
Right.
And then what I've done is I've overlaid 4 or 5 pieces of information. What my company's done is we've done that for every locality in the U.S. that has that white-tailed deer information,
mm-hmm.
and trying to present it to the user in a way that's understandable and ingestible, but at the same time doesn't overwhelm them with information, or doesn't try to sell them something that's not possible or not in the art of possible.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's like, when you think about it, right, it's deer hunters, bow hunters, maybe specifically, it's, we look at so much information to try to make a decision, right? And it's oftentimes, and I've talked to guys about this, where it leads to almost, a paralysis by analysis, right? You get so much information where you're afraid to make a decision, because you're afraid to be wrong, right? Because the human brain, like, we just can't take all those data points and all those inputs and distill them quickly and then feel confident about it, because we still have emotion tied to that decision. We still have past experience tied to those decisions. We have ego, probably the biggest one,
right.
Tied to those, tied to that data. And then we also have, what we've just seen being in a tree, which sometimes contradicts what the data says, right? It's like, I've talked to the guys from MSU Deer Lab, right? Some great dudes down there.
Yep.
And we've talked just about, they're very scientific in their approach. Obviously, they're biologists, trained biologists, and that's kind of how they approach things. And so they know from a biological standpoint, there are certain things that are false and certain things that are true, right? And then whenever you ask them to answer as a deer hunter, and I've done this in a series I did with them, they'll say, this is what the data say, and this is what our studies find. As a deer hunter, I still go and do this. You know what I mean? Knowing full well that, like, what he's doing as a deer hunter probably isn't aligned with what the data is telling him and what the studies have told him, but still he can't throw out that tied in deer knowledge that has been passed to us, or that we've read, or that we've consumed somewhere. So I'm curious to hear your answer to this. Knowing how data driven you are and analytical you are, and that's the premise of kind of this of your company, right? Is to kind of distill in for large pieces of data, multiple large pieces of data. Are there still times when you make a decision where it's just like, you go on that, like, bow hunter gut feeling, where you're like, man, everything in the world is telling me this is wrong, but I just feel like I need to do X?
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Still do it.
I love it.
Well, first off, I should say I was blessed and honored to be friends with Charlie Alzheimer. And if you know Charlie or his work, it revolved a lot around white-tailed deer and the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the first book I ever read cover to cover was his Whitetails and the Moon book.
Mm-hmm.
And I still hunt the dates no matter what, based on, even though I'm in the millions and millions and millions of deer data points, right? Probably more. And I'm not boasting. I'm just I've probably looked at more bucks and how bucks move than maybe any layperson ever.
Right.
When I look at GPS, right, collars.
Yep.
And I'm probably rivaling most researchers because I'm getting it from multiple institutions.
Right.
And anytime I have a question, I go to that data and I look at that data. I still will hunt Charlie's predictions for the autumn equinox predictions that he has in his books. And I have them mapped out on my phone to like 2040. And there will never be a day that I'm not in the woods when that man said, be in the woods, because there's something about you can't argue with his results.
Right.
But second, there's also something about tradition and honoring the people who came before us, because they all knew something that we didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And just because we're sitting on a bunch of data and we've got some algorithms that are making predictions and stuff like that, doesn't mean we get to dispatch with them. It
Right.
doesn't mean that at all. What it means is we're putting more pieces of the puzzle together. It's why on my app where we have moon overhead and moon underfoot, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've just brought on Greg Litzinger, and if you know Greg,
Oh yeah, Greg. Actually, he and I were texting today. He actually texted me. He was like, "Hey, you're talking to Bill today."
Yeah, well, I told him I had a podcast with you guys tonight, and he had mentioned that he knew you, and he goes by the moon.
Yeah.
Right, and you cannot argue with his results.
Yep.
And I don't care to, because look at his wall.
Yeah.
Look at the deer that he puts on the wall. Now, are there a confluence of other things that he's doing? Probably, but I put that on there for people like him so that our app A can be a one-stop shop, but then B, I refuse to dispatch with the past and the people who came before us, because they all knew something that we didn't. Right.
Yeah.
So Greg's on our pro staff team now, and that information and any other information he wants, he says, hey, I think it'd be a good idea to throw this on there. I'll probably throw it on there as long as it's not taking up too much, realty, or I'm sorry, too much space on the board. But moon underhead, moon underfoot, the running moon we put on there, and other things. And then, but for me, right, and as far as hunting and things that I do, another thing, when I do it all the time, I will look at a map and I'll say, I think I've looked at the data, right, on mature bucks and saddles, especially on public lands, and they don't use them like people think they do.
I would. It's funny you say that. I want to hear the rest you say, but yes, I agree.
When I see a good looking saddle on public land, I am drawn to them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if there's a good look, now there are ways that saddles get better from an analysis standpoint when they're around bedding,
mm-hmm.
or the deer are not pressured, or there's a primary scrape,
mm-hmm.
or beds are coming together with a saddle.
Yeah.
Fine. But when I see a nice saddle somewhere, especially in hill country, and I've got no reasons, I still gravitate towards them. I still sit them. I don't know. And I'll see, 2-3-year-old bucks. I'll see some does. I might see a bear, some fox, coyote, or whatever, anything like that. I still love sitting them. I still do it. But I get it, probably because when I first really got serious, I read this book called Hill Country Bucks, I think it was called,
mm-hmm.
or Mapping Hill Country Bucks,
Mapping Whitetails, I think probably.
Mapping Whitetails, that's what it was called, by Brad Herndon, I think was his name.
And it's a good book. It's like I've read it, and it really helps kind of understand and outline and define. I've always said, even if you're brand new and you're just really learning to read topo for whitetails, great book. If you're someone who understands and has been reading topo for a while, it's still a good book in my opinion, because it will bring things to light that you've probably overlooked in the past. And that was, I read it, I think like a year ago. It was a great book.
Yeah. And I gravitated towards that book, and being a military guy who understood maps really well and how people use terrain, that all clicked for me. And I hunted saddles hard. I mean, but once again, saddles are contexts where saddles work, and people could say, well, I've killed 3 big deer over saddles. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
I've looked at like 200 trophy class bucks GPS analysis for many, many years. If they use them at night,
mm-hmm.
and they use them rarely.
Yeah.
And so that, but I still do it.
Yeah.
I still go and hunt them.
I can't not hang a camera in it or something like that. What I've found, and this has just been something I've learned. My buddy Chad Sylvester, he owns Exodus Trail Cameras. I hunt some big woods with him. You know, very large tract of unbroken, you know, I guess contiguous pieces of land, right? About 70,000-ish, 60,000, 80,000 acres, something like that. And what I've found, at least in looking at his trail camera data and hunting this particular area, is that I'm trying to figure out how to say it. Some of the very, very subtle saddles I've seen activity in, right? To where it's almost undefinable unless you walk to it, unless you're physically boots on the ground. The ones that you could really see from a topo haven't had as much success. What I found in this particular area is very steep too. Like the ridges aren't so much ridges as they are more probably spine backs than they are ridges. What we've found is they're using a lot more of bench systems coming together on those ridge systems, how the bench systems kind of start to run together. Like that's what we found actually that they use more often than they will a saddle. But still, the one saddle that I found that has worked really well for me, that I killed a good deer out of, and year over year, if I hunted this spot, I'd have encounters. I actually usually send a buddy of mine to this spot because I don't hunt it every year. Piece of public, but it's a saddle in between two doe bedding areas. And if you're there between the 6th through like the 10th, it is fire every year, you know, but it's conveniently positioned between two doe bedding areas on either side of it. And so bucks are just constantly cruising that saddle all day, getting back and forth between doe bedding areas, you know, and it's dynamite. But it's interesting that you say that, because I immediately, as soon as you said it, I was like, oh my God, I was like, I'm glad he has data that actually supports this, because I thought I was going crazy.
So there are a couple of things about that data, and you're absolutely right. When there are reasons for them to travel them, they will. But this is a kind of a primer I should start saying more often, is I only know what the data says. I don't know the why.
Right.
Like I can think about the whys. And one of the whys that I've thought about this a lot for is when you start talking about 140, 150, 160, 180 inch class deer, they got that way by not acting like the rest of the deer.
Right. Yep.
So what I think, this is my own just thought, it's not correct, it's probably not correct, but it's what I think, is when they start smelling or realizing or knowing that deer are using this area all of the time, they immediately stop using it.
Draws predators. Just, I mean, if you took us out of the equation, right, and just looked at it just from the animal kingdom perspective, like, you know, if you hang a trail camera somewhere and you have a bunch of deer hitting a trail camera, it's not going to be too long until you probably have a coyote come through that same area, right? So it makes total sense. And then when you hit hunting season, those areas, you know, a buddy of mine, he asked me some questions. He was writing an article for this publication, and I gave him a quote, and he was asking me about hunting pressured public land during the rut. And what my response was when I look at a topo map and I'm figuring out where I'm going on public during the rut, I take any really identifiable topography feature. So saddles, really clear benches, anything anyone could see from a map and not put boots on the ground, I immediately mark those places off my list, because those are going to be the exact spots that other people are going to also identify and gravitate toward. And so they just become non-factors for me, which then I start looking at what are those secondary terrain features and what are those edges that are created by breaks in habitat or whatever that I could potentially start using.
Yeah, that speaks to your point before, right? It's a mixture of things that you have to put together and understand. But then the other thing that people don't conceptualize as much as they should is that they're also competing against other hunters.
Yep.
So when they understand what other hunters are doing, that will help them, right? So like one of my favorite things to do, and another guy, I'm dropping names now, but another guy we just signed on to for our pro staff, Garrett Prawl, is like the DIY sportsman.
Yep.
My favorite place to sit on rifle opener is an escape route for bucks and does when they are trying to get out of a piece of public land that I know where there's lots of pressure. It's basically like where a ridge system comes together, and then there's a small valley, and then there's like one out. Right. That's an area where I like to sit, and I'll see between 16 and 30 deer in a day. And but any other day of the year, any other time I would sit there, I'm simply not going to see the deer. Yeah. It's only going to happen on that one day when people are just nailing the woods, and they're in there at like 6:30 and they're out by 9:30. Yeah. Because the biggest jump in movement usually happens around like 10 a.m.
Yep.
which is just simply everyone leaving the woods
Right.
and scaring the hell out of all of the deer in that area.
Right.
And then that's, then I'll just see them all just flying through this area. And that's how my second biggest public land buck was taken in that way. And I had to yell at him to get him to stop.
Oh, wow.
Like he was just moving along. I was like, meh, meh, meh. And finally I was like, hey, stop.
Right. Hold
and
up.
He looked up and then I shot him. Yeah, exactly.
Right. That's funny.
And I still bow hunt that. I still bow hunt that area. There's no reason to take a rifle in there.
Right.
Because a lot of times I can take 2 or 3 doe as well when it's allowed. They've tightened up some of the regulations now, so it's only 1 buck, 1 doe a day. But it used to be I used to be able to take 2 doe out of there along with my buck.
Oh, wow.
For the day, because they'd just be shooting out of there all day long.
That's doing work there, man. A couple deer in one day.
It's a lot of.
So I want to get into the differences. I guess let me just put it this way. What the difference is between what your platform does and what some other suggested predictive platforms do, because I've looked at some of those other platforms and I feel like, in the past, I'm sure other people have too. And I feel like those platforms specifically aren't harnessing quite the same type or amount of data and are using more human input and information into it than it is true data. And not saying that that's, bad or whatever. The people who, I'm not going to mention the name, but the people who run it are very successful as hunters. But it's still not unbiased. And what I like about your system and what you have going on is that it is truly unbiased. It is just telling you purely what the data is doing. Because I think what the trap that the other program falls into to a degree is that the folks who create it, they have very deep experiences from one area of the country, which aren't necessarily applicable to what I will see in Pennsylvania in a high pressure.
You're hitting the nail on the head.
Right. So
you basically said everything I would say.
I just did your sales pitch for you. There you go.
Yeah. We need to bring you on here after, but yeah. So my thing is I want to remove the human from the OODA loop, right? So like the observe, orient, decide and act loop, right? Mm-hmm. So I want human out of that, because any human interference in a system is a factor. It's another thing that needs to be accounted for and adjusted for, and it's very hard to observe or and then account for human interaction in a system, because we don't know why we do things, right? We are ruled by committee. A lot of people say, well, I know what I'm doing. It's like, no, you don't know why you do half the things that you do, right? A lot of guys want to start going to the gym or stop eating, and they don't do that. They just, go back, do whatever, the same thing they've always been doing. So when we introduce humans into those, you're inherently flying a system when you introduce a human into it. So my goal with our system has been to abstract away and remove as much human as possible. A contact point on there would be on the GPS studies. We don't use deer data from 3 days after the buck's been captured, because we want that buck to go back to the way that he was before he was caught, and not, acting like he has just been beaten up.
Right.
And really avoiding areas. We want him to kind of go, I think actually it's 5 days. You don't use it for 5 days. So I guess the big first and biggest, I guess separation or how we are different is this isn't a Bill Thompson model. Mm-hmm. I've killed some good deer, and I routinely put some good deer on the ground and in the freezer. I have not spent, in order to see what millions and millions of data points of deer movement, I would have to live to be, 400 or 500 years old to see as much deer as I've seen on a computer,
right,
from a movement perspective. And you were absolutely right. And the science is crystal clear on this. Deer in certain areas, are subclassed differently because they truly act like different animals. Mm-hmm. And I guess not only in areas like what a deer in Minnesota will do, or a deer in Wisconsin, or a deer in Texas and Arkansas will do, they're totally different as it relates to how they move in certain types of weather. And it's repeatable, it's demonstratable, and you can see it. And then on top of that, across age classes, what a 5-year-old buck or doe, matriarch doe will do, and what a 2-year-old buck will do is not the same at all. They're not even the same animal. It's not even. It's gotten to the point now where I'm like, you're not hunting the same animal. If you want to get on public land and you want to kill a 150-inch deer because they're out there, you have to get used to not seeing deer for 15 sits, or 16 sits, or 17 sits. Get used to it, because they are not acting like the rest of the deer.
Yeah.
They're not doing what the rest of the deer are doing. They're not comporting themselves in a way that the rest of the deer are doing. And you might as well be I would equate it with trying to, rolling in jiu-jitsu. I don't know if you've ever done like jiu-jitsu, but rolling in jiu-jitsu with like Hoist Gracie versus the normal dude, right?
The normal guy just showed up to the MMA gym, right?
Right. They're both humans. They both have strength constrictions. There are both things about them that are unique, but you might as well not even try with this one. And you're going to be able to run into 100 guys who are like this guy, and they're all going to be the same, but this one is not like the rest of them,
right?
In any way, shape, or form. So we account for that, and we're actually going to be probably in the next 6 months or so, we will be dropping a mature buck model.
That's awesome. Love it.
But what is going to be, how I should say this is 60% of the time deer are the same.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's that other 40% that separates them. But it's almost as if the older or mature bucks have learned how to deal with their instincts, because on days where does and 2-year-olds and 3-year-old bucks move a lot, 7-year-old bucks do it too, but they do it in a much smaller area. So whereas a 2.5-year-old deer might have, usually they're ellipse shaped, like a home range of a deer,
mm-hmm.
right? Not core, home range. They're usually elliptical shaped. That buck on a high movement day, like a 2.5-year-old buck, will be all over that ellipse.
Right.
They'll be moving everywhere. And there are reasons for it. and we know some of those reasons because we can turn them on and off in the machine, and then we can look at how it changes the prediction. But then with that 6-year-old buck, right, his home range is a little smaller, but then his core range is smaller yet. And then inside that core range, though, he'll still be moving a lot all day.
Right.
But he's just doing it inside of 150 yards.
Right. Right.
So he's getting up, he's eating, he's pooping, and then he's moving to a different bed. And then, on a high movement day, he might do that 15 or 20 times.
Right. And I'm suspecting like a high movement day could be a bunch of different reasons too. A high movement day could be
absolutely
that he's getting a lot of wind shifting. So he's wind shifting his bed around because he might just move on the edge or on the point of this ridge that he's set up for a southwest wind, but the wind switches. So then he wind shifts to the other side of the ridge, but he's still on that ridge. He's not moved very far, but he's moving constantly to have the wind to his advantage.
Yep, absolutely. And then another one that a lot of people don't, I guess I'll give a little tidbit of information here for your listeners. South of the Mason-Dixon, rising or falling humidity has a lot to do with a buck changing his bed, and I have no idea why.
That's interesting.
But when humidity is up, I see movement.
Wow.
Like as it changes in Mississippi, Arkansas, and Texas, and South Carolina. Humidity has a lot to do with movement.
That's crazy.
Now, if you talk to the MSU guys, you might want to ask them why.
Right.
Because I don't know why, but humidity gets a vote. Now, up in the north, even where we are, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, it doesn't affect it as much. There's some variance, but not a ton. But it gets as much of a vote down south as temperature does.
Really?
I think it's something, don't quote me. Maybe I shouldn't say a number. I want to say it's something on the order of like 30% of the time or something like that. So it's almost as large because people say I hunt cold fronts. Cold fronts are fine, but they only get you there about 30% of the time. There are cold fronts that deer sit out, and it has to do with what leads up to that cold front. If there have been favorable feeding days, if there have been 12 favorable feeding days leading up to a cold front, a trophy class buck has no reason to get off of his belly because of one cold front that lasts for.
He's full and content.
Right.
Good to go.
Right. Exactly. But up north, right, there are other circumstances that will make them get on their belly for a small feeding window before a small drop or rise in barometric pressure. especially when it's coupled with things like cloud cover.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas that gets almost no vote in South Carolina,
Right.
but it gets a ton of vote in Minnesota, and then some vote on the East Coast.
Wow.
So that kind of speaks to your earlier point. There is not, there's not one ring to rule them all. There's not one model, right? We have to bias the models based on the proximity of the nearest GPS data that we have.
Right.
So if I like, for instance, if I have Maine data and Connecticut data, which I have, and I am trying to do protection for somebody in New York State, that data has more weight than my Minnesota data has for the movement for those deer over there.
Mm-hmm.
And it couldn't be any other way. Why would you do it any other way?
Right.
So when you're trying to develop a model, there's a couple of things, and there's actually, I'm not even speaking about one deer company right now, and I think I know who you're talking about, but there's actually a few prediction models out there. There's not one model that can predict against any of them, because when I was setting all of this up, I did this work and I would use these models that these other guys had, and some of them were worse than a coin flip, or if you had like a 3-sided die and you were to roll it, statistically you'd be better off using the die trying to figure out what days they're actually doing more than you would be to use these apps. That's because great. It just doesn't translate.
Right.
And that's not naysaying. Once again, there's probably goodness somewhere in there.
There's good intent there. The approach and the execution is flawed.
Yes. But the other thing is, the model has to regionalize, and on top of that is there's a couple of things that the data, like for instance, I won't do anything with this model or for this company from a user experience or a user interaction standpoint if the data doesn't bear it out. For instance, I'm dealing with a company. Sooner or later we'll go public about this, but we're dealing with a company that's invested in our future and wants to see this thing come to light in a much bigger and better way, and had suggestions early on in the season or earlier on about, have you guys thought about doing like an hourly model instead of just like, for this day deer are going to move. Mm-hmm. And the reason so we're probably going to go to a morning and afternoon model, because I do see variance in morning and afternoon, right, but not a ton. Mm-hmm. I certainly don't see it across hours. And there's actually studies that support this, but also the GPS data supports it. Deer don't have fine-tuned instincts when it comes to changes in pressure. They don't move a lot in 1 hour and then decide to bed down the next hour. And then, I'm back up now and I'm moving a ton for the next hour. It's like hour by hour prediction doesn't work.
Right.
It's not a thing that you could think about it from an instinctual standpoint or as a human standpoint. If you are frustrated, or if you have an emotion that's consuming you, right? You become like a cyclops. That is your emotion. It doesn't vary by hour.
Right.
You don't get really frustrated for an hour and then magically, if you haven't solved the problem or done whatever, get unfrustrated.
Right.
Deer move off of instinct, and the instinct and what the data bears out is it's a daily thing.
Right.
It's like whatever happens during the night when they're out feeding, doing their thing, they're at an instinctual level. And again, I'm guessing.
Right. I think
what the data bears out is they don't move hourly, they move daily. If they're going to be moving a lot, statistically at 7 a.m., they're going to be moving a lot for 9 a.m. as well.
Right.
Now they're not going to be moving as much at 9 a.m. as they are at 7 a.m., but they're still going to be moving more at 9 a.m. than they would on any other 9 a.m. time series on any other day. Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. And I get
other ways.
I get
it's daily.
Yeah, and I get the idea of why not doing it hourly, and that makes sense to me too, because I think when you're dealing with such large data sets, you are I'm trying to figure out how the best way to say it. If you start looking too, and when I say too deeply, it's probably the wrong word because you're looking very deeply at the data, but you will start to introduce things that are not natural or isolated incidents of variables that are isolated incidents, right? That do not follow, that aren't part of the norm, the outliers. You start to introduce outliers, right? So for example,
statistical outliers.
Right. And so what I'm kind of thinking of is if you're looking to see how a mature buck is going to move just in general, right? You want to know what weather conditions or factors are going to make him be more active on a given day. If you're looking at it hourly, it could be that a coyote bumped him from his bed and then he had to continually move and he wasn't where he wanted to be. So now he didn't have the wind in his favor. So now he continually moved and shifted because the wind was not what he needed it to be, or whatever the case is, right? Like that one isolated kind of outlier variable now kind of skewed that entire data set for that particular animal, right? And so if you look at that then across a bunch of animals, as you are doing, those outliers, you begin to then have more of them, and you begin to introduce even more, outlier bias to how these deer are going to potentially move on a day-to-day basis. So it totally makes sense to me why you wouldn't want to do it hourly. I think that's where your human experience, as we were talking about before, we don't throw out the old because of the new. We try to figure out what we could learn from the past and implement those things and be smarter by using some data and technology. It's like, so then at that point, use some of your experiences of hunting this particular piece. What do you know about this particular animal? Do you have trail camera data that also then starts to give you more specific, definitive information about that one isolated deer, right? And so then at that point, you can start to make larger or more finite kind of moves, or much more fine-tuned moves based on your information about that one animal, right? And so it's not about removing the hunter's intuition. It's about supporting the hunter's intuition to make better decisions with what they know to be true as well.
Yep, absolutely. And reinforcing, either helping them dispatch with false presuppositions that maybe are putting them in a bad place, or reinforcing their good suppositions that are helping them out, right? Because I'm sure somebody's grandpa somewhere has said, in Alabama, when the humidity is moving, you need to get out there. And
I guarantee you one of them have said it.
I guarantee you that grandpa is out there.
Yep. Right.
And everyone is probably giving him a hard time and said, your grandpa's crazy or whatever, right? At deer camp, someone's giving this dude a hard time. Meanwhile, he figured it out. He knew, right? There's something, people know things, right? We are, in our essence, pattern detection systems, just like in a neural network. That's why we are a neural network. We detect pattern visually, just like a computer does, but also, abstractly, just like a computer does now, right? And that's why I'm always trying to integrate and update these systems to make them more efficient and just give people access to that grandpa everywhere. Mm-hmm. So like for my situation where I didn't grow up with anyone in my family who hunted really, some 16, 18, 25-year-old who wants to get into hunting can access our, this wealth of, this wealth of knowledge and get some good data from it to get them started, because our system, as I said earlier, it's still wrong 40% of the time.
Right.
Right. And that's a significant amount of time.
Right.
I'm just trying to help them get, so that if they're not ruining their best spot 70% of the time, maybe they're only, messing it up 30% of the time now, or 40% of the time.
Right.
And that might be enough to get that buck in there to help them out, or to get that doe in there to put meat on the table for their family.
Yep.
Whatever it might be. As I said earlier, I'm trying to isolate as many variables as possible and only present them with data that correlates. In other words, data that we can see. In other words, here's an easy point of contact, or an easy way to understand why we decided to use what variables we did. If the weather variable didn't impact the amount of movement or the pattern that the deer were in, we didn't use it.
Right.
So when we're programming the model, we look and we first pull the model, and it's actually just as complicated as a neural network we use to tag our data as we do to make inferences about our data. That is to say, did moon phase, for instance, impact deer movement? Yes or no? The system reports, and then we make a decision. Okay, yes, it seems to impact deer movement in this way. So we're going to include it in that way as we're training our model, and as we're updating the model, and as we're doing predictions for the consumer. Did relative humidity? Well, it didn't seem to in this data, or this data. All right, well, then we're not going to include that for that piece of data up there, because it didn't seem to affect the deer from a movement standpoint. And our movement predictions are getting very, very, very good. One point of contact, we had a deer biologist who we are working with, and he had contacted me and said, I'm excited about your model, but I got to tell you, this weekend in the deer woods, he's like, in all my years, this weekend in the deer woods is going to be on fire. And your prediction system is saying low, low, low low like every day of this weekend.
Right.
And I was like, oh man, this sucks. This is not going to be good, right? And I got a text from him on that Monday saying, I saw nothing all weekend, and only one guy in our hunting parties had reported one movement on one good night. And like out of everybody, when we did the numbers, it was something like we were right 78 or 80% of the time based on all the observation data that we'd gotten from people.
Right.
We were up in like the 80th percentile, and he was flabbergasted. Like that was the proof in the pudding that we needed. Like, you've got this. It was essentially a hunting party of state wildlife managers and deer biologists.
Right.
So, I mean, this is the group of people who you want reporting. They know these deer. They've tagged these deer. They manage these forests.
Yep.
They've named these deer. They've interacted with all of them. They've taken their antler measurements since they were, fawns. Yep. Or I'm sorry, 1.5-year-old bucks growing up. They go in there to cull this population, right, to make room for new deer coming out. So this is like,
shooting fish in a barrel, supposedly.
Right. And they're all saying your stuff's wrong. You're going to be wrong this weekend. And it ended up that we were right most of that time for that weekend. And then instantly we got an email saying, hey, all of these guys want access to the model. So it was a great, for us, it was a great, like, proof in the, the proof's in the pudding. Like, and that's how it's the only way we want to be measured, and it's how we ought to be measured.
Right.
Is are we producing for people, and are they seeing right? Because you can have all of the data and you can have all of the inferences and you can have the most high-tech models, but if it's not translating for people,
right,
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so our first relationship, I guess, from a pro staff standpoint, was with Garrett Prawl, and he was running cameras, and he is very diligent about how he, sees deer, when, where, recruiting, all of these things, or I'm sorry, scouting, all of these things. And he had even gotten back to me and said he was very impressed with when he lines up daytime buck sightings or early deer sightings, and then he draws the statistics from it. He gets the numbers from it. Then he compares it to what the predictions were. It's right in there at about 67%.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's right there.
Yeah.
And we started in on pattern. And I will say pattern's a little more nascent than movement is. The app that we're actually going to be releasing the app on Wednesday, by the way.
Nice.
I should mention that.
What date is that? Just because this will probably come out after that happens. I just want to make sure we have the
25th.
What is it? The 25th?
The 25th.
25th of November.
Yeah, we were trying to get it out there for most people. I'm sorry, what did you say?
25th of November. So everyone out there listening, by the time you hear this, it'll be live and available.
Yeah, and we'll do a 25% off discount for your listeners.
Okay, awesome.
So if they do, if it's all right with you, you can cut this out if it's not. But if it's all right with you, they can put the word truth in the checkout, and we'll give them 25% off.
Perfect.
And it is a beta, so we're still this is still not a full release. It's for people to use it and say what they like and what they don't like. I think they'll be very impressed with the movement portion, the pattern portion, and about 60% of the United States so far from our beta team that has been doing the testing has been very good. There are some areas where the pattern doesn't work perfectly, but we're fixing that. We're refining it. Pattern is to say a buck works a particular scrape line, or does show up to a particular field, and they always come in like from this direction, and they usually come in at this time, right? Traditionally, a hunter can say, I've patterned these deer.
Right.
Well, they get patterned, as you alluded to before, based on weather and environmental variables like wind and temperature and cloud cover and things like that, because it allows them to scent check areas before they go in to do whatever they want to do in that area. So we've gotten the model to recognize pattern, and it does very well at recognizing patterns around the U.S. But just like we said before, it's regional. So I think areas where we really don't have a ton of data, it still hasn't nailed pattern down. But we look to have it nailed down by next year when we do the full scale model, or I'm sorry, the full scale app release, like actually in the app store. Right now, people will be, they can access the app on Wednesday through our website at www.spartanforge.ai. Then in the top right corner, it's just like log in or register. They can log in and register, get access to the app. It is a beta. Like I said, we're still testing it, but on the movement pattern prediction, everything that in the military, we call it a common operating picture. But it's basically when you combine that with, whatever mapping service you use, you're going to be able to have everything you need when you go blind into the woods to either do scouting or hunting on a new public piece, or you didn't get to scout in the off season. But you're going to have everything that you need. You'll know the historics for the area. You'll know the weather variables for the area. You'll know the last 2 weeks. You'll know the primary winds. You'll have a wind plot, a windrows diagram for the area. You're going to have your the rutting moon, the peak mating dates, the secondary mating date. The secondary peak rut for every place in the U.S., along with our machine intelligence predicted learning. Everything's going to be there that a guy or a gal needs, to get themselves going in the woods. And then we're going to refine that and add a lot more things over the summer into next year, and also offer a lot of stuff for people to help them in their scouting and their off season.
Nice.
So I really see this as, becoming like the one-stop shop for hunters, so that, if you're anything like me, I have something like 7 or 8 apps on my phone,
right,
that I use in the past to get everything nailed down for a hunt.
Yeah.
I'm looking to make that like a thing of the past.
Right. That'd be awesome, man. I want to be sensitive to your time, so I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I want to ask just a couple things, because I think, when I look at the app, I have it up here, I think people will be familiar with how to read the forecast information, looking at the weather that's, kind of predicted out over the course of, 5, 6, 7 days, whatever it ends up being. But the deer movement, we've talked about that a little bit, because you have, a high activity, average activity. I'm just looking at, and then a low activity I see here for Saturday for me, which sucks because I'm going to hunt Saturday. But
well, I should say, I'll stop you there. Just so we've done some tweaks and changes to our model, and also how we've bucketed the information. Low really isn't a good representation of the data. We're actually before it releases on Wednesday, we've actually changed our buckets. So what we'll be talking about then is core movement, and then the amount of core movement. So core you could define as a buck's where he spends the most of the daylight hours, or a doe.
Right.
Excuse me, I'm coughing. Spends most of the daylight hours. Our model would have traditionally called it low movement in a normalized pattern.
Mm-hmm.
It's not true necessarily, because there could be multiple instances of linear movement in a small area,
mm-hmm.
and calling that low doesn't do it justice.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yep, no, that makes sense.
So what that we will call that is core movement in a normalized pattern, and that'll help the hunter understand, okay, I'm going hunting Saturday. I just need to know that I need to be focusing now on bedding areas,
right,
or transition that's closer to bedding areas. Does that make sense?
No, totally makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a prediction on high would be like full range. In other words, I can expect during daylight hours to find this deer in transition, in feeding, or in their bedding area. Like they could be anywhere and everywhere across that spectrum.
Right. No,
so we are doing a couple changes,
yep,
tweaks there.
That totally makes sense. And then you have your pattern, which is abnormal, very normal, or very abnormal, normal. And the way I kind of understand that is that the very abnormal pattern just means they might be leaving, and I'm just put it in layman's terms, the confines of maybe their most secure area. So a bedding area, they might be moving. That's more likely to move outside of their core safety area, right? So it's I'm thinking more rut activity, where they're going to travel and travel outside of their normal parameters. And then what I see as normal doesn't mean that it's necessarily less movement per se. It just means they're going to follow probably more of that typical bed to food pattern, where you're going to find that movement is going to exist more isolated in their core bedding area, or in and around security cover, essentially.
Right. Precisely, man. We got to bring you on, because I get asked this question by our beta testers, and I'm always explaining pattern to them, and I'm never able to put it in, succinctly. But yeah, you said it exactly right. You can expect your pattern to be very abnormal, or abnormal at least during the rutting periods.
Mm-hmm.
When is your peak rut, according to the outfitter?
For our area, or for this area, is November 14th.
Yeah, so you're looking at 7 to 10 or 11 days after that. What are we at right now? The 23rd. Yeah, so I would expect very abnormal to abnormal patterns
mm-hmm.
for your area, because does are being pushed, bucks are pushing,
mm-hmm.
and nothing is right. A buck's bedding wherever he needs to bed to be downwind of them does right now, right?
Yep.
It might be at the tail end of this first peak of the rut,
Sure.
but they're still running activity and there's still big bucks on their feet during the day being killed because they're trying to search out the last of that first cadre of hot does. The last of them are just getting mated right now, right?
Yep.
So the smart old guys are still out there trying to get it done. And so, yeah, I would expect very abnormal. And then I would expect your pattern to reflect something along the lines of normal, or at least it'll be distributed as normal in the first week, maybe not even the first week of December, maybe second week of December.
Okay.
You might be seeing more normal, but we do have GPS data for like north of your area and southwest of your area.
Yep.
So it should be very accurate in there.
Nice. And then the rest of the information that's on here, again, like I like the windrows graphic. If I'm reading this right, it's giving me the percentages of what that wind direction, the odds of that specific wind direction are. If I'm not mistaken, is that what it's doing? I'm seeing like a 7.
The windrows that you're looking at should be your last 2 weeks of wind.
Last 2 weeks of wind data. Awesome.
Yeah, and then there should be a value that shows you what percentage it is.
Yep.
So what's your predominant wind on there? What's the one with the largest?
Southwest, which is 100%. Yes, that's what I get.
Yeah, southwest, and then it should assign a percentage saying that's the amount of time. So how we are changing that is there's going to on further releases that'll hopefully come out before scouting season.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be able to hit a drop down and you can say, all right, say you're going to Missouri. You can type in that zip code or that town name for that place in Missouri, hit the windrows, and then you can look at the last 2 weeks. You can look at the last 30 years. You can look at the last year, or you can look at the date time range that you normally go to Missouri year in and year out, because it predicts year by year.
Yeah.
So in other words, in Missouri in November, I'm just spitballing, this isn't true. For the first 2 weeks of November, 61% of the time it's been a northwest wind.
Right.
That is year by year. That's consistent.
Yeah.
So that way, when you're going to do your scouting, and say you want to go to Missouri this summer to do your scouting, you pull up the outfitter, you hit that in there, and you say, "Oh, here's the windrows for the first week in November, which is when I go to Missouri." Right. I'm looking at that, and then what we're coming out with probably it's right now. Greg Litzinger and I and Garrett are field testing or looking at our wear feature. You'll be able to overlay that with the wear feature, and then the wear feature is going to say, okay, based on that wind, here's where we see bedding and here's where we see travel corridors on a physical map, so that you line that all up, and now you're getting a look at, okay, now when I'm going to go to Missouri in July, I'm going to go scout the wind and bedding areas that are conducive with my wind at that time. It does you no good to scout your south wind in Missouri, right? Say you got a south wind in Missouri in the summer, which most places do. So then you go and scout, your leeward ridges and beds that are for a south wind.
Right.
It'll do you no good.
Yeah, because you're now looking at the north side of the ridge, and whenever you come in, you're having north wind. They're better on the opposite side of the ridge.
Yep. So what you'll be able to do temporally with the outfitter is look at that scenario and then go and do your scouting based on that. Even though you might be looking at, some pretty faint sign, it's going to be the correct sign. So when there's a scrape or an overhead licking branch or something like that that's broken off, those are still things you can find in July.
Right.
So then you're looking at the outfitter's win and wear feature, and then you're looking at this, and it's helping the hunter again put that puzzle together.
Right. Yeah, I love that, man, because I do that, and like you were saying earlier, it's like I'm having to look at multiple things to try to figure that out. And look at historical wind data, and I'm looking for the past couple of years to understand, well, what's the predominant wind whenever I get here, when I go to scout, what's it going to be whenever I'm hunting. And it would be nice to be able to know, and I can just look back historically. Not only that, the one thing I really like about this is whenever I look at, hunters oftentimes will burn out spots, right? That's not new news, right? And hunt it, on the wrong wind or whatever. And maybe it's because, they're excited to get out to it, or they're just not sure if it's a very specific wind they need to hunt it, they might go hunt it because they don't know when they're going to get that next wind, right? And so what this does for me actually is when I look at it, I go, all right, well, I know, I'm just going to pick another one. I'm going to need a west-southwest wind, for example, right? And for me, I get that about 3% of the time, right? And so if I have a spot that I know that I need a west southwest or a west south south wind, if I get one, I better be in that spot, because the chances of me getting another one in the next 8 weeks are pretty low. You know what I mean?
And you just spoke to another piece that we're going to be bringing out is you're going to be able to set the outfitter up to alert you of when
that's beautiful.
favorable conditions are presenting themselves for specific stands, or for specific areas that you've highlighted. And then also, there'll be a search function so that you can do something like I do. What I'm doing right now is for public land, the public land near where I live will have one prediction, and then the public land down south where I commute to hunt, like some of these places I have to drive like 2 hours. So I'm like leaving the house at 2:30 in the morning to go and get a morning sit, and climb in there. So what I can do is I can set these areas up, and then I can also search for, all right, outfitter, where is the nearest high movement prediction coupled with a peak rut?
Right.
So that it'll say to me, okay, your nearest one is 120 miles away.
Right.
So I need to go to this public forest up here, because that one great thing about being a public hunter, the one thing I love about being a public hunter is I'm not constrained by where I can go and what I can do.
Yep.
And if I want to hunt the rut, I can continue to hunt the rut through January.
Exactly.
With the outfitter, you can know where the rut is no matter where it's happening. You can say, all right, outfitter, I want rut and highest movement. I've got a free week in the beginning of January, and I didn't think I was going to have it. I want a rut and I want high movement. And they'll tell you, hey, here's where you need to be in Mississippi.
Right.
Peak rut is 1 to 7. Here's the state forests. Here are the days that we say there's going to be high movement. Yeah. No more excuses.
That's awesome, man. I love that.
Go and get after it.
Go to Alabama, catch all 5 ruts.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. It's Alabama. It's Florida. It's South Carolina. It's Texas. I believe you can travel anywhere in those states and get a rut, starting in late October until January.
Right. Exactly.
Beautiful.
Well, man, I've taken up enough of your time this evening. I appreciate you coming on here and doing this, man. This stuff, I get all geeked out over it, man. Anything that's going to help me be a better deer hunter, I'm all about it. And that's kind of what we do here. It's just trying to help people that are listening be better deer hunters and get more opportunities at the type of experiences they want to have. So I appreciate you coming on. But before I let you go, give us that information one more time where people can find out about this, get the app, and experience it. And then there's also that 25% discount with the promo code TRUTH, if I'm not mistaken, that you're kindly giving the folks. So be sure to take advantage of that. So give us, where they can find out more about you, where they can find out more about Spartan Forge.
Yep. So www.spartanforge.ai, and then all of our social media is linked on there. I would say we're most active on Instagram and Facebook. So please, if your listeners can come and follow us on Instagram, we will be pushing stuff out there and on Facebook simultaneously on our updates. And then if any of your listeners are, big time hunters and they are serious about their time in the woods, there's other things we can talk another time. We're introducing a diary function that's going to have a lot of stuff built into it.
Awesome.
That's going to help people, I think, a lot. And there's some game-changing stuff we're doing in there. So if you've got people who are serious hunters and they want to be part of our beta crew of people who are just they'll get a free version of the app, but it'll also come with all of our experimental stuff. One of those things was pattern, which we talked about. That's going to be part of this release, but that was something that we were looking at as experimental until it got good enough. There's a ton of other experimental stuff like that wear feature and the nearest rut feature and the nearest high prediction feature that those people can get a hold of. So if they want to contact us, spartanforge.ai, follow us on Instagram or Facebook. And then there's a link on our website to our support function. If they email us there, that's where we're taking, we've got a pretty robust crew right now. I think of about 30 testers. We're always looking for more, especially from the Southeast and the Northeast. So if people are interested, they can come there, and, we hope to see them downloading the app on Wednesday and getting ready for the full production release next year.
Awesome, man. Well, as new things come up, man, you got a home here. You can always come back. Just let me know, and we'll talk more deer hunting and nerd out together. I appreciate you coming on again. Thank you for your service, and congratulations on your retirement. I look forward to seeing what you get into, man.
All right. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. If you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tether, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Maven Optics. And until next time, we'll see y'all.